So those things associated with sleep and wake, the pons and the medulla and the hypothalamus and that, you notice that's all in this central part of the brain that we talked about before. This is important to think about because remember, this is the primitive brain, right? We're not looking at this with critical thinking applications. We're looking at it for, can you breathe and beat your heart? But this all ties into something known as the limbic system. And the limbic system is actually responsible for emotions and memory and learning. So if you want to learn something, actually really learn it, like long term, you know this, you have to involve your limbic system. And we think that the hippocampus in particular is responsible for changing short-term to long-term memories. So we need that resting time for your hippocampus to be able to work and convert short-term minutes, hours, into long-term years. And we often associate a lot of this long-term memory with the limbic system, and in particular with something known as the diencephalon, which is your thalamus and hypothalamus, because we're integrating all of this visual and auditory information, sending it to the cerebrum, and then making sure that it's not impacting your homeostasis in the meantime. The cerebellum sits at the back. It's kind of, many students refer to it as the wrinkly walnut in the back of your head, associated with posture and balance. It has a direct connection to your inner ears, so we'll look at that later on with sensory. It's going to help us coordinate voluntary movements, like how good are you at walking on a balance beam, and your ability to learn new motor skills like playing a piano and hitting a baseball. These are all associated with muscle memory sorts of things. The brainstem, as we keep mentioning, lies as close as you can to your spinal cord and is going to help us with basic life support sorts of things. So this is looking for breathing rates. We're going to look at heart rates. We're going to look at blood pressure. All of those things are going to be associated with your medulla oblongata. The pons is actually the connection point right here, the connection point between your brain and your spinal cord. And here we look primarily at it being a reflex center. And it actually helps you orient your head for things like eye and sound cues. So do you need to move your head? Do you need to reorient to these different stimuli? The midbrain really just is the idea of having a place to transmit information, turn sensory information into reflex information. So things like if you see a bright light, you'll squint your eyes and kind of move your head down to get away from that. This is tying into something known as the RAS, or the reticular activating system. This is basically your filter. So this is what filters out gray noise. Or repeated stimuli. It helps you to filter out background information and helps to keep your cerebral cortex awake. Now, we see this being activated when you're sleeping. This is the area of your brain that would actually wake you up and tell you there's something you need to get up and take care of versus letting you continue to rest. All of this system, it's so very sensitive. All of it, of your central nervous system, is coded in very, very significant coverings and protective measures. So of course you've got bone and skin, right? But you also have things known as meninges, and these are protective membranes that are going to directly cover both your spinal cord and your brain. So the pia mater actually attaches directly to the brain and the spinal cord. I think about this like plastic wrap directly on the surface of your brain and spinal cord. Then you get into what we call the arachnoid layer, or this dark blue area here. And see all that space in there? Well, that's why it's referred to as the arachnoid layer. Somebody decided it looked like spider webs. And this is actually filled with cerebrospinal fluid. We said that the cerebrospinal fluid was made in ventricles in your brain and is actually going to act as a liquid cushion for your brain and spinal cord. It circulates throughout this space connected between your brain and spinal cord. And then the dura mater is actually attached to the bone. So I think about this like the durable layer. So it attaches to the bone, and in this case, looking for it as being just simply another covering in this area to help set up this system, basically so we can fill it with cerebrospinal fluid. Now, many of you have probably heard of meningitis. What is meningitis then? It's an inflammation. Itis is always inflammation or infection of the meninges. So think about having an infection in the cerebrospinal fluid or in the meninges, literally causing swelling that will press on your brain and spinal cord. We have difficulties with your cerebrospinal fluid. Other than meningitis, we see this buildup of a cerebrospinal fluid that fills in the gaps between the meninges, which is terrific. And in the meantime, it's going to help to circulate through the central nervous system, act as a shock absorber, a support system, nutrients for the brain and spinal cord. And it actually gets kind of filtered through and recycled by the blood and the lymph system to keep it clean. But it can get dirty, and when it does and builds up a bacterial infection, that's when we worry about things like meningitis. We can also get a blockage that keeps the cerebrospinal fluid from flowing properly, and when that happens, it actually is referred to as water on the brain.